unmiked or not.
All right, let's just mute. We got just under 4 minutes on radio.
Okay, let me pull up Rockfin and start that shit. Why are you running so slow?
And yes, audience, we are aware there's a hot mic.
Hot mic, hot mic.
Let me tell you how I feel about the whites.
Hot mic in the city.
Hey, NSA, lacrosse.
Man, I still had I had those keywords up all day yesterday too. I didn't even think about having fun with it. I should have. Lacrosse. So weird that a town in Wisconsin is an NSA keyword. Live on Rockfin.
One minute on radio.
Whoa.
Live.
Hey, welcome everyone to Slow News Day Live. My name is Steve Poikinen. I'm here in the Santa Cruz Mountains for just a few more days. I am joined by my better than your co-host, Glory Jones. What's happening, Glory?
It's happening.
We have a whole list of NSA keywords to read off. The squad staged a campaign drive and photo op performance last night, the night prior. We're also joined by investigative journalist Elizabeth Leavoss. She's got an amazing series out on the Finders child sex trafficking cult that goes way back to the 80s and before. It is in Mint Press News, and it is fantastic. Welcome back, to the show, Elizabeth. It is fantastic. It is wonderful to see you. It's been a minute.
Yeah, it has. Thank you for having me. It's really good to be back.
I really enjoyed the podcast that you did with Whitney Webb about this, and I would recommend that everyone who's listening now, if they haven't already checked that out, go back to Unlimited Hangout on the Rockfin or on the interwebs and give that a listen. What have you been up to?
A lot of things. I've been doing journalism again, obviously a little bit more. I've been in grad school, and a lot of other things have been going on. Some 12, 14-hour days that are not related to journalism for the last week and a half. So it's been busy.
Whew,
Yeah.
dang. I know that. I know how that goes. I'm
Yeah.
going to be in the middle of that relatively soon because I'm going to be back to building, and I have like a whole extract lab that I have to build when I get up to Humboldt.
Wow.
And then I get to start building my house. So I'm stoked on that. Before we really get into this, I do our colleague Franco, Frank Analysis, he went out to the Capitol building last night because the squad and the junior varsity squad, the practice team, were out in front of the Capitol, and they were staging an 11th hour, like, I don't know, fake sit-in over this eviction moratorium that they've had 6, 7, 8 months to work on.
Of course.
And then waited until the absolute last second to be like, we should probably address this. And they're standing out there, they're taking pictures, they're hugging people. There's like no cops. Yeah,
That's what set me off, because like I know what anti-eviction protests look like and the response they draw. And the fact that like you have all these young activists protesting against eviction and to extend the eviction moratorium in the middle of the night outside the Capitol, and there's like no significant police presence. Not saying I want them to have to deal with that, but like the fact that there was none is like,
I'm just pulling this up to have as a reference point. I'm not gonna turn on the audio because it's kind of hard to hear anyway. But this is Franco holding the cameras on the steps of the Capitol building. There's Sandy photo op right there. And like this is an 8.5 minute clip or something. The entire time, the first 6, 7 minutes of it, she's just standing there hugging people. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome that we stood out of the place that we work after hours taking pictures. You're welcome. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to help you in any way. But we will take a picture with you, and you can have that to hold and look at on your phone while you're homeless. You could do that at the charging station, the regional charging station in your Hooverville or your tent city or wherever you're at. You can have that memory of you standing next to an elected official that did fuck all for you. And at the end of this clip, like Sandy and her staff are straight the fuck up hauling ass away from the Capitol. Franco is like walking behind them like, hey, I have a question. No, I'm not with an outlet. I'm truly independent. I'm not just AOC just got set up by Project Veritas. So it's, that's probably what they're thinking too. Is like another Project Veritas motherfucker coming to get us, and Franco's like, no, I just have some questions. And they're like,
Surprised the police didn't show up at that point.
Well, and he turns around, he walks back. There's an activist dressing down a Mexican cop. And he tries to get a conversation going with that activist. The activist is relatively fucking clueless. And it ended up being like a really uncomfortable conversation. And this is at like 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, on the East Coast. So everybody's tired and frazzled anyway. But I talked to Franco this morning, and he's like, yeah, there were cops, but not a lot. They weren't up in anybody's face or anything. And I was like, bro, that's how scared they are of the people who want healthcare. They don't care. They don't give a fuck about you. Like the cops aren't even mad that now there's people on the steps of the Capitol again. I remember when that got you labeled as a domestic terrorist. That wasn't even that long ago.
Exactly. Yeah.
It is such a weird situation. And now everybody's back on like some sort of lockdown or mask mandate, at least here in California and at least in the blue states. I don't know what it's like where there's freedom. Maybe either of you ladies could explain what it's like to live in a state that isn't California right now. Jones, I'm sorry you have to come back.
Yeah. Well,
anyway, I mean, seriously, what's it like where you live right now?
I mean, in Arkansas, we've got the governor just, declared a state of emergency and is going to look into, talks about lifting the state legislature's bans on mask mandates. So it's kind of just a, back and forth, but I doubt much will really change. I think, individual businesses might ask you to wear masks more, but basically it's illegal at this point for towns to put in a mask mandate in this state. So definitely a red state, deep red state here.
Yeah. The mask mandate got lifted here, and like most places you can walk into like perfectly fine, no problem. They'll be like, oh, well, we don't require you to wear a mask if you're vaccinated, but we're also not going to check at all if you're vaccinated. So it's like, yeah, you can walk into anywhere without a mask pretty much. But like, I think they're going to start issuing the stay-at-home orders again because apparently we broke some records in terms of, I think it was either cases or deaths in a day in Florida. So I think more stay-at-home orders are going to be declared in the near future here.
So we're suspended on YouTube until tomorrow. So we're writing that out. And I feel a little, more confident about my ability to say this without getting my door kicked in. But they recalled the PCR tests. The antigen tests don't test for coronavirus. Nothing that they have will say that you have tested positive for Delta variant of coronavirus. That test doesn't exist. It doesn't. What are people actually getting sick with?
It's a good question. I don't know.
I mean, we've got an experimental drug that's been shot into 60% of the population. It's the mutation in any virus is generally caused when your body or any host body has built up antibodies to it and has rejected or has been able to successfully fend off an attack from the virus. We've had people who have recovered from this naturally. We have people who have taken an experimental drug.
That's me. I recovered naturally.
Me too. We had it in November of 2019. My whole family did. Laid out. Haven't been sick since. Like at all with anything. It's kind of weird. But I mean, of course we beat the flu, right? Because we cured the flu. The flu doesn't exist anymore because everybody, wore masks and socially stayed distant, except for nobody wore masks or stayed distant because we still have coronavirus. It's Schrodinger's illness, I guess, what it comes down to. We live in a fucking cartoon. We do. Without dragging it too much into stuff that like Elizabeth isn't here for. Before we get into the whole Finders thing, I should mention that we are entirely listener supported. We do have a GoFundMe. I did not put the link in the description on the Rockfin because I had too much other shit going on, but I will do that at some point, and I will pull up the link during the show at some point and drop that into the chats as well. Let's get into this, Ved. Without doing too much to set it up, in Tallahassee, Florida in 1987, some cops saw two like well-dressed, respectable looking dudes with a half a dozen disheveled-ish or various states of distress children and take it away, Elizabeth Voss.
Sure. So it looks on my end like my video is slowing down slightly. So just let me know that you can hear me right and that my internet's okay enough that
Your audio is fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, at that point, it was just a concerned citizen who called that in to the Tallahassee Police Department. It was in early February, and they brought in these two men for questioning, especially after the Douglas Ammerman and Michael Hallwell, or Houlihan, depending on which alias he was using at the time. They basically told the police that they were taking the children to a school for brilliant children in Mexico, and then refused to answer questions. Michael Houlihan then pretended to faint very dramatically. He just collapsed on the ground and pretended to be in a fit. And in the unredacted police reports that were sent to me by Nick Bryant, the unredacted Tallahassee police reports, basically it says that the police officer writing the report in Tallahassee says, like, I've seen people actually have fits and I've seen people fake fits. I could tell it was very obvious he was he was faking this. So obviously that was highly suspicious that these two men they didn't say that they were related to these children. They had no explanation for where the children had come from, and then they refused to answer. So obviously the police were very concerned that these children had been kidnapped, that they could be trafficked across state lines. And so then you have a multi-state, multi-agency investigation that starts from that point. Eventually, it's discovered that the two men were members of the Finders cult, which was based in D.C., but they admit that they operate all over the place, nationally and internationally. So the children eventually, over about a week and a half period, were found to have been the children of Finders members, and at least one of them was apparently the child of Michael Houlihan. So that, on the surface sounds like, okay, so the kids were traveling with the consent of their parents, who were in this group. So they're not being trafficked. They hadn't been kidnapped. They weren't missing children. And so therefore, what's the big deal? Well, they were obviously neglected and very hungry. There were issues with the fact that they had been neglected. The children themselves said they were forced to live outside in DC in the wintertime, that they were not allowed to be inside. Only the mothers and the men were able to be inside. So aside from any of the more kind of insane aspects of this case, those types of facts alone should have led to some type of prosecution, investigation, and removal of the children from the group just based on neglect. So the fact that that didn't happen is bizarre. I mean, children are taken from their parents for so much less than that, as we know, and sometimes under very shady circumstances in that case too. So the fact that they weren't is bizarre as a beginning. But as a result of this investigation in reference to these children, the Washington Metro Police Department in D.C. Searched two Finders properties in the DC area. And then the Virginia State Police and other agencies searched Finders properties in rural Virginia. There's about 5 of them, I believe. And in those two searches of DC Finders locations, this customs agent, Special Agent Ramon Martinez, was on the scene and participated in the searches because he basically had gotten involved through customs, which had gotten involved itself because they had a child pornography unit, and there were issues of, they thought that there may be a potential issue with child pornography being trafficked across state lines and that type of thing. So although the checks in the child pornography databases were negative, Martinez was invited by another customs agent to participate in these searches, and they went along with Jim Bradley, who was the MPD detective who had been kind of following the Finders previous to this Tallahassee incident. The FBI vault documents that I'll get into a little bit later show that the MPD basically stated, oh yeah, we had never really looked into the Finders. Somebody gave us a tip, but we decided that there was no evidence of criminal activity, so nothing happened. The customs documents later penned by Martinez show a slightly different story where Bradley's like, look, I have an investigation going, and this Tallahassee incident finally gives me the meat that I need to get a search warrant. So regardless, they all are on scene. And Martinez writes in these customs documents that came out in the years afterwards, which is the story of the documents coming out is a whole story in and of itself. But basically, Martinez sees a whole lot of very incriminating, damning material in these two locations. One of the first location he goes to is the actual residences of the Finders. And on the second day, he goes to the warehouse. In the residences, he sees there are a few people there who are not Finders members who appear to just be kind of staying there like overnight or renting or something like that, but they aren't cult members. But in a room called the computer room, they what he references as a quote unquote computer room. He finds Finders member Stuart Silverstone, and he gives the social security number for Stuart. He gives some, some biographical information. And that's really interesting because Silverstone also shows up in the Tallahassee Police Department records, calling in anonymously, kind of keeping tabs on the case very closely. So he's obviously a real Finders member who's documented by multiple agencies. And so when Martinez's credibility comes up later, it's noteworthy to state that he's accurately reflecting the presence of Finders members who really did exist in this residence. In this room that Silverstone was in, he finds all of the documents and computer records of Finders' activities, including efforts to kidnap, track, produce children in various ways, some of which are not illegal, but some of which are, obviously, trading, purchasing. It states that they will, kind of produce children intentionally via Finders members, and also stuff to do with
hold up, real quick.
It's a lot.
Produce children organically, right?
Well, yeah,
that's
impregnate Finders members. Yes.
Yeah, that means Finders members are having kids in order to take part in this, whatever the fuck it is.
Right.
It's a breeding program.
Right, exactly. And I think it's really noteworthy that Martinez doesn't go off the rails and speculate as to what they're doing. He doesn't at any time kind of go hysterical on us and be like, what are they doing? He just basically says, this is what they were saying, that they wanted to produce children. He doesn't say this is what they're going to do with them. But obviously it's not, it's obviously nefarious when you're trying to traffic, kidnap, and trade, purchase children. So they also had information about purchasing 2 children from Hong Kong via contacting the Chinese embassy. So you have international child trafficking via foreign governments. I mean, it's damning, to say the least, not only for the Finders, but also for, this is, even at that point, we haven't even got to the interference by intelligence agencies in the US. But at that point, there is that indication that, unless Martinez is completely making this up, that's an indication that if you have the Chinese government involved, then this is probably also involving other governments. And one would assume that one would need some sort of association with the US government in order to do this type of thing. So anyway, so you move on, and he sees a whole lot of other very damning documents. They're labeled operations. They're not labeled games, the way the Finders present that their activities as, being understood by the cult itself. They have titles, titles to folders like Pentagon break-in. They have information on terrorism and explosives. They have also labels of all these different countries and areas of the world in general that are not countries that the Finders are operating in, including Europe, Latin America, all sorts of different places, London. They have what he calls high-tech transfers between London and the Finders in DC. And basically all of this is being done on a very early version of the internet that's very advanced. And also sent out on this network apparently were instructions on moving, quote, the children, because the Finders had been made aware very early on that first day of the Tallahassee incident on February 4th, that like by that night, they were aware of the arrest. They were then telling each other, okay, you need to move the quote unquote, the children. And this is how you evade police detection. You keep them moving through different jurisdictions. This is how you avoid police. So we don't know how many children that was. We don't know how old they were. We don't know any of that. But as I discussed in my interview with Whitney, Martinez is describing in the locations that he visited a vast quantity of children's clothes that were preschool to kindergarten type age. So we're talking very, very young children. In the residence on that first day, when he's discussing this information about the Finders members moving children, that is also corroborated in the sense that the Finders were apparently tipped off by the investigation itself, by MPD police officers calling them on the first day, and that's all of that is recorded by Tallahassee Police Department records. So go ahead.
So the technological acumen of the Finders and the sort of advanced, for the time at least, pretty far along the way, and higher end for the era sort of computing equipment. Does that speak to in and of itself a connection with intelligence, or or were there a whole lot of people at the time operating with that kind of equipment?
That's a really great question. I think that I wouldn't say that if it was only the presence of the technology itself, and I mean, we haven't even gotten into satellite dishes and all the other stuff that was in the warehouse yet, but basically, if it was only the early computing equipment, I wouldn't say that necessarily like necessitated a relationship with government. But in documents that came out later from the customs office, and the one that I'm referring to has not been made public to date, so I don't know what the entire document states, but basically it alleges that the CIA admitted that it was training CIA agents in technological stuff at a company called Future Enterprises Inc., and that was owned by the Finders. And so that basically, and there was also an allegation that the Finders were and Future Enterprises were both basically a front of the CIA. So there is the one of the links between the CIA and the Finders is through the technological aspect that they were training agents. Now, obviously, the CIA denied any connection directly with the Finders. They said, yes, we sent a couple of agents to this Future Enterprises, but we don't have any association with the Finders, and we had no idea that they were involved. And Future Enterprises said, "Oh my goodness, we didn't know that the Finders were this cult, and we fired the guy who worked here." Blah blah blah. So, of course, that was all denied, but nonetheless, the customs documents do allege that was a relationship in that vein. So.
Yeah, well, and besides the technological aspect, you have the fact of, the government and these three-letter agencies, so to speak, getting involved in the cover-up of the investigations of the Finders cult. And, you have a bunch of stuff written on about that, that were basically trying to discount the reports you speak of, but at the same time, the FBI vault release is also corroborating it to some degree. So it's just so much cover up there that really implicates them further.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, again, it's like there are kind of complex layers to this story, because you've got the connections to the CIA and the connections to the intelligence agencies just within the group itself as well, before we even get to the Tallahassee investigation, before we get to the cover-up of that investigation. You have the cult leader's wife, Isabel Petty. The cult leader was called Marion Petty. She was admitted by the CIA later to have worked for them for 21 years. And that, we can get into that as well. But basically, so you have connections going back to the 50s through the 70s with them, with the CIA. But as you mentioned, basically, after Martinez goes through and witnesses this explosive evidence, and then is told by the Metro Police Department in DC that he will be able to review that evidence within a few days, he's put off for a couple of months. And when he finally goes to the MPD and basically asks what's going on in person, instead of speaking to Jim Bradley, who he thought he was going to speak to, he speaks to what we find out is John Stitcher. Sergeant John Stitcher was one of the only other people to corroborate these CIA links. He informed Martinez that the CIA has rendered the entire Finders investigation an internal matter, that basically the FBI counterintelligence division has been told not to inform other FBI divisions of what's going on, and that no evidence will be available for him to review. And so later on, years later, the customs memos written by Martinez become public. They're on the internet online for years. And then later on after that, in 2019, the FBI vault documents are published to the internet. And they include the Metro Police Department reports, the Washington Metro Field Office of the FBI reports, Tallahassee reports that are all heavily redacted, and a large collection of newspaper clippings and that type of thing, all of which are in no particular order. There's at least one instance in the vault documents where they interrupt one document with another document and then they continue the first one later on. It's completely scattered. But as you say, what the FBI vault documents seem to do, if you read them kind of superficially, I mean, really superficially, people at the time that they were published just kind of, lost it. Were like, wow, they're publishing these documents on the Finders. This is explosive. But if you read at least even remotely superficially, you'd see that what the documents were kind of trying to do was refute Martinez's account by including not only massive redactions of important material, but not redacting the material that would say things like, well, I personally didn't have interference in my investigation by the CIA. I guess there's nothing to see here, and that type of thing. But as you mentioned, the documents themselves do ultimately corroborate Martinez in a few really important ways. One of which is that he said that the Metro Police Department reports some reports had been labeled secret. That's true. In the FBI Vault documents, you look through some of the really important MPD reports are obviously labeled secret. So there are factual issues like that corroborate Martinez. And just to go back to what he saw in the warehouse on the second day, just to give your listeners some idea of the extent of what was going on, in addition to all the child trafficking and these operations and all of that in multiple countries, he saw what looked like indoctrination rooms and what the police, even the Metro Police Department report said that there were roped off rooms that looked like sets, which they interpreted as production for pornography. You have, like I said, a whole lot of children's clothes and other things. So there's basically, as I said, these two different locations where a lot of damning material is found. And what Martinez does is he honestly writes what he saw, and then because the Metro Police Department then buries this whole investigation. Not only do any police any news reports from the time kind of turn on their head and basically just state that everything was a misunderstanding, that this was just a hippie commune gone a little bit awry, that maybe was misunderstood by the police department in Tallahassee. Basically, all of that gave cover for the fact that the evidence itself disappeared, that no one was able to see it after it was initially gathered, that the records of that evidence disappeared in terms of the fact that there were no descriptions, there were no photographs of evidence that were kept, and even the vault documents that attempt to kind of debunk Martinez admit that. There are the affidavits of the records of the search warrants, but those search warrants only state things like miscellaneous documents, photographs. They don't tell you what the photographs showed. They don't tell you what was in those documents. So if Martinez were to have fabricated what he saw, and if there were no cover-up, it would be very, very simple and easy for the authorities to say, there was nothing to see here. This is what the evidence was that we found. There's obviously nothing wrong here. But they don't. They don't even try to do that. It's literally black hole.
What I have up on screen right now is from that report, and other documents identified interest in high-tech transfers to the United Kingdom. I want to get into that. Numerous properties under control of the finders. And this is, as you mentioned, terrorism, explosives, evasion of law enforcement. But a set of instructions which appeared to be broadcast via a computer network that advised participants to move the children and keep them moving through different jurisdictions, and instructions on how to avoid police attention. That seems pretty significant. And again, this is 1987. So they would have to link networks like intentionally. And there would have to be, a direct permission access. There would have to be communication and approval in order to establish communication networks transatlantically, unlike or in a much, much different way than we have right now with the World Wide Web. And so for all of this to be taking place in Washington, D.C., the connection with Stanley Gottlieb and Culpeper, by the way, is really interesting, and I definitely want to get into that. And I really do hope that people who are listening right now, that your ears perked up when I said Stanley Gottlieb, and if not, then we'll get into why and why they should. But just the organization that it would take to establish a network like this, the amount of people that would have to, at some level, be aware tangentially even that a multinational, multi-US jurisdictional operation based out of DC was taking place. Like that, it speaks to a much larger I don't know if even cover up is the right word, but just participatory, nature of what this is. And there's even overlaps with a couple of other child sex trafficking cults, including the Franklin scandal. Like the amount of ties into this. I think, if I remember right, there's even a couple of overlaps with like the Epstein and Wexner networks too.
Right.
Do all world governments operate on child rape trafficking? Is that what we're seeing? Is that sort of the conclusion that we all kind of have to arrive at eventually?
I mean, I think that one of the things that I thought was so important when in the wake of the Epstein kind of scandal really breaking in 2019, one of the things I really wanted to do, and the reason that I wrote an article way back then, this was months before the Vault documents came out. I wrote an article about the history of intelligence agencies and these child abuse networks. And the reason I did that is because, the media at the time, obviously with the huge exception of Whitney Webb, but the corporate media at the time was really presenting Epstein as this rich playboy who was an anomaly, and wow, how did this happen? I'm so confused. It's like, gee, he really got away with a lot, didn't he? But it's like they were presenting him as a one-off. And clearly, if you are aware of some of this other history, it's a pattern that has occurred in many different countries. And it's not all in the U.S. It's not all in in relationship with Israel. It's also the United Kingdom. There's issues in Europe. It's all over. So yeah, I would say that there's definitely a connection between the psychopathic power structures that are really running things at the top of our governments. Now, that doesn't mean that every person in every agency is a horrible person, but the people that really have that power don't have a conscience. And so why would we expect when they're willing to bomb children, when they're willing to starve children in Yemen, when they're willing to do all these things, why would we think that they suddenly have a moral compass when it comes to just children in the US or children in Europe? Why do we expect that? So I think part of the issue with this is that we just have an unwillingness to understand the depth of psychopathy, I guess, that runs our institutions, and the fact that there is no boundary they're not willing to cross. And so if something like child trafficking, child pornography is going to give them power, whether it's blackmail, whether it's research and weird black projects that sound ridiculous but are documented to have occurred, whatever the benefit may be, if there's a benefit that they can get from it, leverage, whatever, they're going to go for it. There's no reason that they wouldn't if they can get away with it. And I think one of the things about the Finders in general is that it's a really small glimpse into this greater issue that I don't think we'll ever see again. I don't think we'll ever get a glimpse into this in the way we did with the Finders. And the only reason we have that glimpse is because of Ramon Martinez. And he suffered a lot in consequence of writing what he did, and not only writing what he did, but going public with those documents in terms of the fact that they were eventually given to some congressmen who really, really kicked up a stink at the time. They really pushed for a congressional investigation of the Finders and the cover-up of the Finders investigation, but it never occurred for good reason, I suppose. So
there was a comment in the Rockfin chat, and I wonder, has anyone figured out how John Benet Ramsey, her multimillionaire family, the CIA, her Finders, and the child entertainment marketing, modeling, etc. come together, and that's with like the pageants and the shows, and it really, I mean, with what we know about Wexner, with what we know about Luke Bernal and Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Donald Trump. And now Aram's right, John Benet Ramsey. I mean, there's significant connections between that world, fashion modeling, be it adult, teen, children, whatever, and all
even
of
tourism in some countries.
Yeah, the sex tourism is huge in the global south, and it's not just like hookers or lady boys. It's fucking whatever. Like, that's fucking foul. But on top of that, historically, it's a way to manipulate, blackmail, steer people, and the idea that I don't know, I'd be like, I have kids, I'm ready to kill right now just talking about it. Like, I really am. I would love to be able to just snap somebody's neck that was involved with any of that. But why it seems to be an integral function of government is something that, like, societally we've never addressed.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I don't know why that is, because there's mountains of evidence for it spanning centuries.
Yeah, and I think that part of that is that, even amongst people who are critical of power to an extent, I think that there's a sense of there are lines you don't cross. And so the idea that people who are in these positions of power and have at least superficial credibility would be involved in this, or at least look the other way, I think it boggles the mind. It really does. And I think that the problem is that, and you see this in the investigation too, it's like you have maybe one or two people that really have backbone and integrity, like a Martinez, like a Chelsea Manning, who don't look the other way, like an Edward Snowden. But the vast majority of people who are in the customs service, who are in whatever agency, they just want to be able to take their paycheck, maybe get a raise, feed their family, and pay their rent. And I don't particularly blame people for that. But they know when these types of things happen and they're told from higher ups, and this is what happens over and over and over again, when they're told from higher ups, okay, just don't look at this. Just leave this alone. And they don't know, maybe they don't know to the extent that whatever, leave that alone, what that actually is covering up. They may not actually know the degree of it, at least in some instances. But I think that most people are willing to do that to continue to be able to feed their own family or live their lives. And so that is really the mechanism by which all of this continues to be covered up. And you have the people who won't stay silent are either vastly punished or they mysteriously die. So that's how that happens.
I guess that's settled.
And I mean, I guess that's the goal of that's the goal, I feel, of a lot of the, like, sensationalization of something like the Epstein story, of making it some one-off thing, so that way people don't have to confront the role of intelligence agencies directly in these sex trafficking rings, or in the blackmail, or in the cover-ups, or confronting the whole thing at large, which is that a lot of governments are very much involved in this. And, there are whole different economies that are based off this, like war economies based off this. And so many people don't confront that in favor of making, like, this whole Epstein situation some, like, totally one-off thing. Like, even with Ghislaine, it's like her role got completely glossed over for a second there because they tried to make Epstein seem like the ringleader. Now they're going to make Ghislaine seem like the ringleader, while glossing over the connections with, like, Israeli intelligence and Bill Gates and them. So it's like, a whole...
Nobody is mentioning Bill Richardson. Nobody talks about the governor of New Mexico, Bill Clinton's transportation secretary.
Right.
And
exactly.
the Zorro Ranch either just sold or is up for sale and about to sell. But there's, like, a whole birthing ward there that's just, like, a thing that people know about that nobody really talks about.
Right.
And it just so happens to correlate with a lot of the missing Indigenous women in the area. So
yeah, great point. Fantastic point. And I think that that tabloidification of all of this, it serves to actually enrich the corporate media a little bit, while happily covering up these more serious aspects of what's going on. And I think also another reason that the government not only, because most of us are aware of some of the atrocities that go on across the world in terms of warfare, in terms of the sanctions. Now, maybe people that watch MSNBC and Maddow or Fox News, maybe they don't know, but most of us are basically aware of these things. But when you if you really take stock of the government being involved with the systematic abuse, sale of children, that type of thing, then there is no more even remote shred of credibility to governance as it stands. I mean, there's nothing. And so then it becomes, okay, we are truly, in every sense of the word, governed by criminals, period. So that if that realization is made on a wider scale, it's obviously very dangerous for the current status quo. So
no, I mean, you're absolutely right. But as you're saying that, I'm like smiling.
yeah,
Like, well, yeah, and I will, that's what makes, trying to exit in a way, impending smart cities and the Internet of Things and stuff like that, like even more, I don't know, sound like more of a fucking good idea.
yeah.
And establishing mutual aid networks both in and out of, especially out of major cities, and like supply chains to people that that still live in major cities and shit like that's going to become incredibly vital. What the high tech transfers to the UK, do we know what those were? Do we know what that's about or what that comprised?
In that sentence, it's not specified, but I believe that in a different section of the same document, he's describing money transfers. And when he describes it later in a different document, I think he describes it as money transfers. So I'm fairly convinced he's referring to currency in that statement. But it could definitely be other things. It could also refer to technology. He may not have known, and it also could have been something he didn't understand. It could have been something like, okay, well, they're transferring something. I'm not quite sure what. So I wish we could talk to Martinez. I wish you could have him on your show instead of me, because obviously he's the person who saw all this. The problem is that Martinez was heavily, I don't want to say punished. His life suffered immensely as a result of this, and he's unwilling at this point to speak to literally anyone, and I don't blame him. So, but he did, and I say this in every interview, but he did confirm to me that the documents themselves, the customs memos, are legitimate, that he authored them, and all of that. So.
Man, I have nothing but sympathy for somebody who's gone through all that shit, who's had to have their whole. If you set out to be, an officer in general with the intention of like trying to do a nebulous concept of the right thing, and you're at your job and you think you're doing the purpose that you set out to do, that's described to you in the oaths that you take and the training that you receive and the the sort of ethos surrounding the mythology of the agency. When you're trying to do that and you're punished for doing your job description, I can see how that would embitter you permanently and definitely put you off on reporters or journalists. Because you're only going to be reminded of that thing. You're going to have to relive all of that. You're going to have to spend time focusing on that. And if you've just been trying to get away from it for a couple of decades, I totally get it. I do. Having said that, Officer Martinez, if you're listening, would love to have a conversation with you. I would. We can talk about sports. We can. Like, hit me up. Culpeper, Virginia.
It's a really interesting place.
Let's talk about why.
So basically, there was finders activity in Culpeper, Virginia. When this whole finders issue was being investigated in '87, Tallahassee police were informed by Lieutenant Hart of Culpeper, Virginia, that basically the finders had attempted to take over the local city government. That's a literal word for word statement from the Tallahassee Police Department records. No surprise that you don't see those in the Washington Metro Police Department reports, by the way, that type of information. But so that by itself raises huge questions just about like, what on earth are the finders doing? Like, this isn't a hippie commune. What hippie commune is it taking over local city governments, or labeling things operations, or doing any of these other things that we see them doing? So first of all, that by itself is just crazy. Second of all, although I do not have a direct link between Sidney Gottlieb and the finders themselves, it's very interesting that we later see that Sidney Gottlieb, who is basically like the big bad guy of MK Ultra in a recognized way, right? I mean, but I think the New York Times was the one who coined the term like a black sorcerer of MK Ultra in describing him. He retired in Culpeper, Virginia, and he not only retired there, but he tried to remodel himself as an eco-hippie. Raising goats and eating yogurt is how the New York Times describes him. So it's just a big coincidence, I mean, it's Virginia. You have all of the CIA people there, right? I mean, there's nothing to see there, but I think that's very interesting. And similarly, another parallel that, again, doesn't have a direct, a direct link between these two individuals, but the experiments during the hippie period in the 60s of Dr. Louis Joylon West, who was a psychiatrist who was paid by the CIA to do basically MK Ultra experiments on people, most of the time unwittingly, in prisons, in Air Force bases, and that type of thing. He set up a hippie crash pad in San Francisco in the 60s and was letting people come into those houses or that house and basically just stay there for free as long as they didn't mind being kind of studied by grad students who were dressed up as hippies but taking notes. So, and the reason that is important is because in terms of the whole CIA relationship with the finders, before any of these investigations occur, you have Marion Petty working for the military for 20 plus years at the exact same time that he's already involved with what would become the New Age sphere in DC. And he himself spoke in court documents about opening up apartments where people could come and stay for free. Same exact scenario. He just wanted to learn about money, power, and sex by having people come through. He happens to be working for the military at the same time. So there's a very interesting picture there that would contrast with the way the finders present Petty, which is, oh yes, he worked for the military, he was trained in intelligence, but he never was assigned, and he had a sea change after he left, and that's when he became spiritual. No, he was doing the spiritual scene work while working for the military. And it was in the Tallahassee Police Department records. We also have Lieutenant Lee Hart, I believe, in the same breath that he says that the finders tried to take over the local city government in Culpeper, he states that he thought Marion Petty would just simply get on a military plane to China from an Air Force base while this investigation was ongoing. So the fact that a member of a police department, I believe it was a police chief, would say that about Petty is incredible. Just by itself, that alone is insane to me. But
well, because when he began his military career, it wasn't like the Air Force yet. Right?
Yeah, it was. I believe it was an Army Corps. Yeah, it was Army to begin with, and then the same Corps he was in shifted into what would become the Air Force. Yes.
And the Air Force itself has always kind of been this sort of separated branch of the military where there's almost to a person. At least from speaking with one of my best friends growing up who is career Air Force, it is the most heavily evangelical, most heavily spiritually based community inside of the US military. And that the sort of Christian mysticism, it kind of subsect of that religion runs really prevalent through it, especially at the brass. So even to this day, so it's interesting that somebody like Petty, who started at the inception of it, when the Air Force was still relatively young, that they're doing this New Age experiment, and trying to figure MK Ultraing people or what the fuck ever they were doing, that's got a direct link to the Air Force, because the woo-woo is still a very prevalent thing inside that particular branch of the military.
That's fascinating. I'd never heard that before. That's new to me. I think it's interesting too, because if emphasizing how early this was, that Petty was doing these open houses and starting to be in the sphere, is that, I mean, it was in the 1930s. This was pre-World War II. This was pre the birth of the CIA. This was OSS type era, you know, a little bit before that even. So it's like, so he was very, very early in this entire situation. And
I
it
would
also
love to find out if he has a connection with the Tavistock Institute.
Oh yeah, that
Oh
now
my
that would
God.
be interesting. Now that's the word you're not allowed to say on the
That
internet.
would.
Isn't it? Yeah,
We did an
that's
episode
a good
with
one.
Jared Beck.
With Jared Beck.
Oh, that's great.
Jared came on. We titled the show "Everything You Love Is a Psyop," and we just went in deep on the Tavistock
Oh,
thing. It was
Good
a
for
blast.
him. That's great.
It-
Wow.
it
Yeah, that's a
was,
whole
but
can of worms. Yeah.
I would put a Trading Places movie bet
Mhm.
that Petty had a connection with the Tavistock Institute. $1.
Yeah, I wish there
$1.
was more information on Petty, because I mean it would be very interesting. I mean, there is the mention of those high tech transfers to the UK, but other than that, I'm unaware at this time of any like relationships he had with people from the UK or British intelligence specifically. It's weird that China's the thing that keeps coming up in the Finder's documents.
Well,
I mean, this
not
was
just China, but Hong Kong.
this is you know, in the midst of the Cold War. This is anti-communist era, but yeah, Hong Kong though, I guess that actually in a way is a link to the British intelligence now that I think about it, because you know, history of Hong Kong and all that. And I want to plug the interview with Whitney, because she has a lot of information about the relationship between Wexner, Epstein, Hong Kong, Southern Air Transport, all these different things. And that was a really interesting conversation on that front.
Well, because Air America, which Petty claimed his son worked for, became Southern Air Transport
and was a recognized CIA front. As Air America. That's the thing. And Iran-Contra and all of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not sure if Floridian Internet did that or what, but we lost glory from it. Huh?
Yeah, I think internet died or something.
I mean, Jesus, man.
The timing.
Shit together, Florida.
Yeah. But, yeah, the interesting thing about that connection between Air America, Petty, and then Epstein is something that I definitely talked about with Whitney a little bit. And again, it's like the thing in Culpeper. It's very interesting, but there's not enough documentation to kind of go further than just to say, well, they're both connected to the same CIA cover company. That's interesting. So,
hey there.
My internet disconnected conveniently a couple seconds after we mentioned Tavistock. That's nice.
Nice. Yeah, dude.
I mean, we're still live streaming.
That's
a good sign. And again, I mean, since we're suspended on YouTube, I don't really care. I think when we come back, we're probably going to do the thing that Burmis has been doing successfully, where we go up into a point on YouTube and then go, okay, everything else we're going to talk about is going to get us suspended again. So come hang out with us on Rockfin or Odyssey for the rest of it. Still really glad that Odyssey has live streaming, and am trying to figure out how many more platforms we can get on and stream on all at once, because fuck YouTube.
Yeah, really. Seriously.
What they've done with Consortium News, or to Consortium News rather, from like the jump. I mean, really from like early on, I remember trying to watch a number of CN live streams where it's just like, yeah, no, we're not going to let you do it.
Yeah.
We're not. Oh, you want to
week-
go live? Fuck you. Oh, you're trying again? That's cute. Fuck you. You know, dude, you got to be just brutalized over there.
Yeah,
And
last week they basically banned us, and then they unbanned us. But then this week, so there was a stream about Israel and Palestine with Pilger and an amazing Israeli historian, and it was completely censored within 16 minutes of the thing. And I think that was how long it took bots to mass report it. They eventually reviewed it. They did put it back on YouTube. They lifted the ban. But then the next time we tried to stream, we had bizarre audio problems where we had like a different clip playing at the same time that none of us in the actual like Zoom chat could hear. It wasn't happening on our end. It was just showing up on the YouTube end. So it was, anyway, yeah, YouTube is horrible. So
stop using Zoom.
Yeah.
I've been screaming that at Kathy for 3 years, and perhaps in another 3,
Maybe.
it'll take off. It will. I can't even get the goddamn convo couch to stop using Zoom. So I like, baby steps.
Right.
The Pilger thing. I mean, I guess while we're here, Craig Murray went to serve out his jail sentence, I believe this morning or like yesterday, something like that.
I think
The time zones
he
are
said 10:45 a.m. like today, but 10:45 a.m.
London time.
Yeah,
Exactly.
London time.
Yeah.
So it would have been last night our time, I guess.
Yeah.
Or
But
early morning.
Craig Murray, 8 months for writing. Julian Assange, potentially 175 years for publishing. The way that legitimate journalism is becoming an endangered species, and the way that Misty Winston, our good friend, calls like how we get done on YouTube a form of sanctions.
That's a good word for it.
Well, because it does, limit people's ability to make a living at this. It is a blockade against information. It's a fitting descriptor. This is going to be a weird question. How much more internet do we get? Do you think? Like in this capacity where the 4 of us can sit here, have this conversation, have it publicly, and also have the ability to leave this conversation and then have an encrypted one, because encryption is all but dead in Europe.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know. That's a question kind of beyond my scope, I think. But I think that unfortunately, the internet, the whole internet sphere is very much not what it used to be in terms of our ability to be independent. Things like YouTube, the monopolies that have developed are what really prevent any type of independence, because, and we all know this, but, there's no breaking up these monopolies because they serve power, which then, means that we're sitting here and we get censored on YouTube. So we're on a different site, but there's nobody on that site. And so I think that basically the method you described earlier, where you have a kind of semi-censored conversation that you put on YouTube and then you say, okay, for everything else, you go to these other places, is really great for a number of reasons. It prevents you getting completely deplatformed on places like YouTube, where you're going to get more of an audience. And then it allows you to still have the conversation you want to have, while also promoting those other platforms on YouTube to a wider audience. I think the thing is, when people say, okay, well, YouTube's evil, Facebook's evil, Twitter's evil, I'm going to get off of all those platforms. The shame is that you're then preventing your voice reaching that wider audience on those platforms completely. I don't think that's the right idea. I think that kind of moderate approach is really a good one, because you're serving as a bridge for more and more people to come over to other platforms. So I don't know how much internet we're going to have, so to speak, especially with the Patriot Act 2.0 type stuff that we're seeing. But for the time that we have, the situation that we have right now, I think that the methods that you all are using are very good ones. So.
Yeah, I mean, I forget who says this, but it's like you need to be able to reach the cat video people too.
That's Burbis.
Exactly.
That's
Yes.
his.
Okay.
Yeah. We gotta have the cat video people. They need to know this. They do,
Right.
and he's right. I have this clip that I retweeted, and it's of some performer at Lollapalooza, a drag king called Tenderoni, in neon spandex and neon fishnet spandex, running out onto the Lollapalooza stage with a large cardboard needle that says vaccine on it. And now, okay, so everybody that went into Lollapalooza was supposed to show that they had been jabby jabbed. They're still referring to the Lollapalooza as a super spreader event. they're doing hardcore vaccine porn from the stage. At what point do people start going, boy, that's an awful lot of coercion, I wonder why?
Yeah. I don't know, but I feel that anything that is being pushed at me by the conglomerate of social media empires, the state, the media, it inspires the greatest skepticism possible for me. So, and I think it's sad. It's sad that there's so much of, I mean, honestly, right now, I would say that the vaccine issue, the coronavirus issue, is more radioactive to talk about, especially in independent circles, even than the finders, unfortunately. And the reason is that right now, that's the major narrative being pushed. I mean, talking about the vaccine issue now is kind of like, it's more explosive right now than talking about WMD was when WMD was the actual current narrative. So I guess what I'm saying is that the biggest amount of censorship, the biggest push from state corporate media around these protective narratives, it's always the most censored thing that there is at that time. So yeah, I think that it's sad, therefore, that we have independent media so divided on it. I'm not saying that there should be one narrative that independent media pushes, but I think that it's not helpful to basically aid in censoring people when they have a different opinion than you, especially if it's skeptical of power.
That's exactly what it is. It's the total shutdown
of the conversation. Yeah, right.
And the things that we so vitally need as people are public debate and informed consent. And the kind of like hope of the internet, the hope of being able to do shows like this is so that can occur. But when you've got someone that is on a different side of an argument, the debates are almost performative. Do you know what I mean? Like nobody's debating to, try to persuade a group of people one way or the other. They're debating to increase their own platform, their own reach. They're debating to get like zingers in or shots or jabs or whatever. And it's not an intellectual exchange of ideas with the purpose perhaps being to persuade one side or the other, with a broader purpose being to get this information out and to encourage more of these conversations and exchanges of ideas. And the just refusal on the part of the pro-jab crowd to just be like, believe the science, it's the science is the science, and you're an asshole. No, because we've actually got a mountain of data to suggest that we need, to like way pull back from what we're doing and really consider the consequences of what we're sticking into people. And why our only solutions for all of these problems is to give trillionaires more money and to take away more civil liberties and human rights.
And part of the problem is that when you have this discussion, and I guess the only thing I can compare it to is the atmosphere of fear after 9/11. Like if you question the narrative, you're literally killing people. That's the line. Yeah. If you are skeptical of anything that's being pushed by the establishment on this COVID front, then you are literally killing people, you murderous monster. So like that level of hyperbole, you just can't. It's very difficult to have a rational conversation with, and it's like, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a scientist. I don't claim to have any type of special knowledge about any of this. I just think that we should be able to have conversations without labeling each other, murderers and that type of deal. So I think that's what makes me most skeptical of all, is just the fact that we can't have these conversations, that it's this radioactive to even raise the issue. It's mind-boggling. So
No, I mean what it speaks to, at least to me, aside from like, hey, maybe it's really shady and we should take a closer look at it. But what it speaks to is just the kind of like the success of the Project for a New American Century, the success of 9/11, the success of the Patriot Act, the success of the NDAA with the Smith Modernization Act, and the onslaught of the manufactured confusion, the constant propaganda, the beating over the head of it's okay to dissent in small ways over here that also make major corporations money, but genuine dissent, genuine disagreement, that is to be punished.
Right. Yeah. And I think, yeah, so basically it's a little bit, and a little, to an extent, it reminds me of Russiagate. I mean, there were supposedly independent journalists at that time who went with the corporate media narrative that, and again, based on fear. Trump's a monster. He's literally Hitler. How dare you question Russiagate? The fear of Trump was used to just lobotomize so many people. And I think I see the same thing happening around COVID. I haven't covered it much simply because I feel that I'm really not qualified to go into the type of science and data medically that you would kind of need to really report on it. And so, but I've watched Whitney Webb's reporting, which I think is great. And I'm really happy that people like her have been really early on the scene on that story. But overall, the censorship is insane.
Yeah. So. And I mean, it's going to come back to hurt all of us. Like the moment that someone, even if you don't like them, gets censored, you're open to be subject to that very same treatment. Like, and that's where all of your struggles connect in a sense, because you all become candidates to be censored by this larger system. Like you brought up the Israel-Palestine panel that was censored. Like if you're advocating for censorship of someone like Ryan at T-Lab, then that's going to come back and bite you when you need coverage from like Robert Inlakesh about Palestine, or when you're trying to report on a protest and you're getting signal jammed and all that nonsense. So like you can't be for censorship of people just because you don't like them or because you disagree with them.
Exactly. I don't think, and even if, even when it comes to like the QAnon thing, I think that's a complete, I think it personally, it's a psyop, right? But I'm not arguing for them to be censored, because I don't think that that's helpful. And as we all know, that does come, as you just point out, it comes around to you and the left as well. So it's really tiring, because but I guess what you see over and over again, whether it's Russiagate, whether it's the WMD, whether it's COVID, is that really it's fear that is used and hyped to the point that the fear trumps any rational conversation. And that's the excuse to silence people. And so I think stepping back from that level of fear is just the first thing you can kind of do in order to just be more open to discussions. But regardless of individual people's kind of attitude, the social media giants are definitely using this for everything it's worth in terms of censoring people. So, but.
I mean, there's never let a good crisis go to waste.
Right.
Then there's we try to only we try to stay away from selling certainty, and stick to what we can prove in terms of like available documentation. Try not to spend too much time on vacation at Speculation Island. However, it seems like what Julian Assange talked about so much in terms of filtered information and the way that information would come to be delivered to you in a way that is tailor-made to push all of your right buttons for outrage or product purchase. Like that has almost arrived. So I guess what I've been trying to come to terms with is like, how much of the other side of a psyop does independent media play into when we go at certain narratives the way that we do? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that unfortunately, it's just that I mean, I've talked about this before elsewhere, but like the kind of reinforcing binary, and this relates back to the finders too. So you have like the binary of everything CNN says is true, or everything CNN says is a lie, being reinforced by the QAnon narrative, because that side says, well, everything that CNN says is a lie, so therefore everything I get off of 4chan must be true because it's the opposite of CNN. And then you have CNN able to say, look at this ridiculous narrative coming from an alternative space. This is insane. We need to medicate these people. They need help, you know. And so they mutually reinforce each other. And I think that you know, I don't know where we want to go from there, but basically, like the issues like the finders and child trafficking scandals that are similar to the finders are a perfect example of how those reinforcing narratives basically both help to dismiss these subjects. So with the QAnon people, you make it radioactive by, I mean, just evidenceless, ridiculous claims that then get attached to these stories that make a quote unquote legitimate journalist or an independent journalist completely unwilling to look at it because it just is radioactive to your career. And then you have people like the CNN people, or Vice in the case of the finders, fastening onto the QAnon types and going,
sorry, I have a visceral reaction to Vice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I don't blame you. Yeah, no, their article on the finders was like laughable. Like literally, it's like, well, this is real weird, but the CIA says it wasn't a big deal, so I guess it's not, guys. Whatever.
Oh my god.
QAnon's dumb.
Yeah.
So like, then those people use that QAnon salaciousness in order to say, well, if you go near this story, then you just are a crazy and you need to be on some Haldol and sit down and shut up. So that in addition to the fact that there were
Haldol.
Yeah, right.
I haven't heard that word in a long time.
But
damn, going for the fucking the shuffle.
Cookie's nest.
Yeah, dude, that's shutting it down.
But so it's just one of those things where I can understand why this isn't covered more. And there, to be fair, there are independent journalists who have looked at this. You have Derek Brose of the Conscious Resistance, who's done a series of really great work on this, and a documentary, an interview with Toby Terrell. He's produced a lot of material. Nick Bryant, who wrote a fantastic book on the Franklin scandal, was actually basically turned onto that story by the finders because he got a copy of the customs memos on the finders, looked into it, was kind of in the process of reporting on it before hearing about the Franklin scandal. And because of looking at the finders, he thought, okay, this may not be as crazy as it sounds. This type of thing clearly can happen. So I'm going to look into it, which eventually produced a book. So there hasn't been zero coverage, but for all the reasons we've already discussed, and the fact that there are no adult victims who have come forward, you don't have a lot of those same aspects of it that you do in even the Epstein scandal, where you have a lot of victims who are adults who are testifying to what happened to them. You know, all of those things make it pretty easy for even an independent journalist to be like, you know what, I'm just not going to risk it. I'm just not going to go there. It's cool, and plus it's a very old story, so there's no reason to for a lot of people. But as Whitney and I discussed as well, the age of the children involved means that it's very possible that who, you know, whatever they experience, they may not have a very clear memory of. It may be very difficult for them to come forward for a lot of different reasons. And so, you know, it's a whole lot less cut and dried than being a 15-year-old, a 14-year-old, or even a 10 or 12-year-old and being trafficked than it is some of the stuff that the finders appear to have been doing to very, very young children. So.
Yeah, I mean, when you've got a like cult situation where it's the parents that are producing the victims.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that changes the dynamic incredibly. And even when you hear like Rose McGowan talk about her childhood and the cult that she was, there's nobody else from that cult who's come forward to be like, yeah, no, it's fucked up, dude. Like that's not happening. So even inside these things, the same stigmas and the same sort of a pariah that a whistleblower turns into in the military or in the corporate structure with a cult setting, it's probably, I would imagine, exponentially more severe because you've got familial ties there. You've got people that have raised you. And these are the people that you would be, quote unquote, betraying by telling the truth of the, abuse that you received. It's I guess more like a mafia at that point in terms of trying to get out than like being a kidnap victim and trying to escape.
Right.
Well, and I feel like because it's you're isolated within your family from the start, like psychologically it also like inhibits your ability to be able communicate that experience to others just because of that isolation alone. Like there are cases, there are like other cases of abuse as well where like, like I forget her name. I think her name was like Jeannie or something like that, where she was kept locked in a basement by her mother and she lost the ability to learn languages as a part of it. So I have no doubt that like, not to necessarily that severity, but to a small degree, some of these people might lack an ability to communicate these things, like these complex and horrible things to people outside of who they knew.
That's a great point, and I think that actually goes back to the story itself, in the sense that the children that were picked up were between the ages of, I believe, 1.5 or 2 and 6, and they were only one of them was actually able to communicate. Only one of them was verbal, and the other children were defecating and urinating on the floor. They didn't know what the inside of a building really was about. They didn't know what a they were obviously really surprised at things like staplers and objects like that, which reinforces what the one verbal child told the authorities, which is, we're not allowed inside, So, and I mean, the type of things that basically were alleged to have been going on in that case were so bizarre as well, that even if you can communicate, and even if you're, relatively willing to communicate what's happened, the type of bizarre things that you might have to describe are going to be alienating to almost anybody you might tell it to, So like you had witnesses in the Virginia State farm that I believe was at one time known as Ragged Mountain Ranch, that the finders owned. Witnesses described children screaming for hours on end at that site, and the state authorities reported that they had found cages where witnesses, and cages on the farm where witnesses said that children were being kept when they were there. So that type of condition, that type of scenario, if you're a victim of it and you grow up and you're trying to describe to people, I was kept in a cage or whatever, it's like people really, it's as in this whole story in general, it's so beyond the pale that it's almost unbelievable. Most people, rightly so, don't want to believe that people do this to children. Now, when it's an isolated incident, like you mentioned, the woman who was kept in the basement as a child and socially isolated, and there are instances of kids being kidnapped and kept in basements for 20 years and that type of thing. We're able to kind of conceptualize it only in the case of a lone nut. But when you have an organized group doing it that has ties to government, that becomes an entirely different thing to try and wrap your mind around. So if you're a victim of that and you know that there are military associations and you know that there's stuff like this happening in a more organized way, who are you going to tell that to? What are you going to do? So I think that there are a whole lot of reasons that we most likely won't hear from victims of this type of abuse, and that's another reason that I say that I don't think we will ever see another case like this where we get a glimpse of so much of what was going on and so much of the extent of it in terms of the government links, in terms of international trafficking, international issues around terrorism and money and all of these other things, combined with this type of abuse of children. So
That's interesting because we've never been at a point in history where information is more accessible. And yet the reality of finding out more about any of these organizations has decreased exponentially since Tallahassee in 1987 or 1993 when it got completely swept under the rug. And it is important to note that the person in charge of the Department of Justice in 1993, I believe, was Janet Reno, who then more or less went on a killing spree for several years as head of DOJ, taking over for one Billy Barr.
Yep.
Who
What a guy.
would have been responsible for sweeping this under the rug in 87.
Yeah. And
No, because George H.W. Bush, so that was 89 technically. So I should look that up. Who was it?
George W. was Bush 1, George H.W. was Bush 2.
That's reversed.
No.
That's
Or
the
it
other way
was
around.
the other way.
George
Never mind.
W.
Yeah, it's the
Herbert
other
Walker
way.
was the OG.
But and I would like to just add, while we're on the subject of that 93 investigation, basically, and if you read the articles I've written, all of the kind of chronology makes a little bit more sense. But basically, the stink was raised by Martinez and some Congress people around this case in 93 by about 93, and CBS's 48 Hours was looking into doing a show on the finders. And so with all of that going on, the Department of Justice was finally like, look, we're going to do a special task force. It's going to be, we're going to look into this. We're going to put this to rest. We're going to figure out if the CIA interfered, and we're going to see if they covered up for some criminal activity on the part of the finders. And that was what was reported in the most scrubbed article on the case from the era from 87 and 93, which was written by the same guy who broke the call boy scandal for the Washington Times, Paul Rodriguez. And so, but even in that article, he's quoting the Department of Justice saying, we're going to have a special task force on this. When we look at the vault documents, what we see is that, and I'm sorry, you guys probably heard me say this already, but I think it's really important, is that the DOJ says, okay, FBI, you do the investigation for us. There is no task force. It's just them passing it off to another agency. And the FBI says, okay, Washington Metro Field Office, you do it for us. The Washington Metro Field Office was involved in the 87 investigation. Martinez says they were intentionally kept in the dark as a result of the CIA interference. And so WMFO, the Washington little division of the FBI, is tasked with then reviewing the MPD reports, creating all the synopses. So I would say a majority of the vault documents that were published in 2019 are from the Washington Metro Field Office, communicating with FBI, communicating with other people, and gathering. And they're the ones putting together the MPD reports that you see. They're the ones gathering all of this and creating these synopses and conclusions. So, it's not, and not only is that basically a straight up lie by the Department of Justice that they were going to investigate themselves, but they're involving an agency, a field office that was directly involved in the original investigation. So it's not a neutral third party. It's tasked with basically reporting on itself. And also, when it comes to just, the level of integration in DC with these various agencies and police departments and whatnot, it's admitted in the Washington Metro Field Office reports themselves that the MPD, the Metro Police Department, was very, very close with the CIA, not just any intelligence agency, but the CIA, to the point that they would just call each other up on the phone and communicate about investigations. So the idea that it would be impossible for the CIA to basically quietly sweep something under the rug that was already under control of MPD it's really easy to see how that could happen. And the one person that we could have heard corroboration of Martinez from, Sergeant John Stitcher, who I mentioned before, died before the 93 DOJ in air quotes investigation. So we can't, they never got to interview him. And by the time he died, He was working as a security guard for an embassy in DC. He had retired from the MPD. So basically, I think it's important to give that narrative, even though it's kind of like wordy and I guess a little bit boring to an extent, because it just shows how, just in the plain documents themselves that on the surface appear to refute Martinez, you do see this delegation of the investigation that really shows how corrupt it all was. And in addition to that, you see, when we return to the 87 investigation, how Tallahassee is doing a good job collecting all this information. They're documenting the fact that at least 2 of these children had signs of sexual abuse. They're documenting that there were, police from Virginia saying that the finders had attempted to take over governments in Culpeper and that type of stuff. But within about 10 days, once that investigation goes to DC, once the Metro Police Department get involved, that's when you have this tidal shift from the mainstream media across the country, hyping this story of cult ritual abuse, satanic cult, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly the MPD are like, oh, sorry, nothing to see here, no criminal activity found. And then that's when the narrative by the New York Times, Washington Post, and Los Angeles Times, all of the people covering it, basically then shifted to, wow, well, we done fucked up. It's just a commune that's just misunderstood. They just have an alternative lifestyle and they like to alternatively school their children. So
I checked. I mean, that's it's fucked up. I checked, and Ed Meese was Attorney General in '87. Ed Meese resigned under scandal from the WedTech scandal. And as Attorney General, was described by his peers and the people who led the WedTech investigation as incompetent at best, corrupt at worst.
Sounds about
So
right.
that's yeah. I mean, it tracks. It really does. And to have the next Attorney General to serve with any length of time be Bill Barr, be the cover-up king, be the guy who was instrumental in making sure that, significant portions of Iran-Contra never saw the light of day, significant portions of the Church Committee never saw the light of day, to have him sort of take over, and then there to be a 4-year period of absolute silence about finders before it resurfaces again in 93 once he's gone. Kind of interesting too.
I think that is interesting. Yeah. And I think, honestly, I don't think that they would have done a 93 investigation if it hadn't been for the media coverage and the fact that, these Congress people were really putting up a stink. There's no other reason I can see that they would have looked into it. And what it did serve to do, obviously, is that they served to create a conclusion where there's just nothing to see here. That's the end story. And honestly, if we're to believe that there was this kind of cover up and that there was this kind of corrupt protection of this group doing these horrible things, why on earth would the FBI publish documents showing that in the FBI vault? Why would they allow that to happen? Well, because what they did was, and especially given the fact that they published it in October of 2019, which is just a few months after Epstein died, and there was this huge explosion of interest in these types of stories. Well, when you only have the very damning Martinez memos in public view, and that's the narrative, you want to publish things that will counter that narrative and make him look like he's crazy and look like he's fabricating this and just made it up. So that's what you see in a lot of these documents. It's like that's what the investigation in 93 was really aiming to do, is throw dirt on that. But even so, nonetheless, even they can't fabricate descriptions of evidence that were never logged. They can't explain why that was. They can't explain why. I mean, the explanation by Washington Metro is that the evidence itself was returned to the finders and or destroyed within days. The Tallahassee Police Department records indicate that and actually it's interesting, there's a conflicting narrative because the MPD says, well, we sent all the evidence to Tallahassee for their investigation. Tallahassee says, well, from what we understand, all the evidence was given back to its owners within a few days. And so it's basically whoops, and if you assume that there was nothing to see here in those documents, even so, within a few days of the arrest, they hadn't even determined who the children's parents were. There was no reason to give that evidence back to them yet. They hadn't been cleared. It was still an active investigation. So the whole thing is absolutely shady, but it takes really digging through the documents to see all of that. And if you only skim through it, you can pick out a couple of quotes and say, well, so-and-so redacted said they didn't get interfered with, so there's nothing to see here. But.
To anybody listening right now, learning how to be a good researcher, it's a very, very, very valuable skill. It is. And devil's in the details. Like, there's a lot to be gleaned from going through old reports, especially when you start to learn how to read them and start to learn what to look for in terms of how things are phrased. You do note in the article, and I don't know how long you can hang out. We've been going about 90 minutes. The show's got to go 2 hours because of the radio thing. You're welcome to bounce whenever you want.
I can stay until 2 Central, so the top of the hour is fine with me.
I guess.
Awesome.
And I've got a couple of clips I wanted to show too, just that have nothing to do with this, but are just fucking wild in their own right, and kind of relate to ancillary things we were talking about. But you do mention in I think it's the 3rd article, that there was somebody, one of the people who was investigating, and I think it's the 93 report, does this sort of weird psychoanalysis.
Yeah, that was actually, okay, there's a really
Or was that the 87?
It was 87. There's a really key document that's the overall, it's like a synopsis. It's the overall investigative report by the Metro Police Department. And it basically summarizes their whole investigation. That document's labeled secret, and I refer to it in pretty much every article I've written because different parts of it are relevant to different aspects that I'm talking about. And it's got a really bizarre section that does, like you mentioned, psychoanalysis of the finders. It's riddled with typos. It admits that the writer believes that the CIA was using them as a front, but for the purpose of disseminating like low-level disinformation, and then refers to the mind shaping of children, but they speculate that the abuse wasn't really intentional and that it was just kind of the result of power gone wrong in a group like that. It's very bizarre. I don't know if you want to pull it up on your screen. If I can probably send a screenshot eventually, but basically it's really bizarre is the word I would use. And it's a really important contrast to the type of writing that Martinez was doing, where all he did was describe what he saw. He didn't interpret, didn't speculate. Whoever was writing this report was doing all of the things you don't want to do, I guess, as an investigator, because all they did was speculate. They didn't have any evidence for anything that they said. But nonetheless, it is interesting that even in that case, they're basically admitting that there was some sort of relationship with the CIA. They're admitting that some type of abuse of children occurred, and they just disagree on to what extent and why.
So I'm trying to first, second, or third report. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's the 3rd that I believe I quote that. Yeah.
Okay, and let me drop down.
I'll also look for it because I can probably find it pretty fast. And the thing is, this is another issue too. So I can pull up the FBI vault documents really quickly, but
sure.
trying to find the right document, you can't Control F. You can't search within the document. You can't even highlight. So every single time I've quoted, I've had to quote word for word, like type it all out. And if I lose a document, like if I want to come back to it later, I have to manually scroll through and find it. So the FBI really made things easy for investigators for sure on that one. But
yeah, they redact like half of it. The font is always like unreadable to the point where like you said, you can't Control F and try to search for certain keywords or phrases. Nope. You just have to comb through it all by yourself.
And the thing is too that the redactions are another thing to talk about, because obviously they're significant redactions. They are large ones, and most of them, and this is something interesting too, most of them are labeled with a privacy exemption. So it's like, we can't include this because it would basically dox somebody. But the really key ones, the ones that are in Sergeant Stitcher's report, the ones that relate to the customs memos and that type of stuff, those are labeled confidential and secret. So if there was nothing going on with the finders, why do they have confidential and secret redactions that are paragraphs long? That makes no sense if there was nothing there. Let me just see. I'm on the third article. I'm going to try to find that quote. But there are a number of screenshots in the article itself. Most of them I tried to get from the documents that are not publicly available, like the whistleblower complaint report that confirms that Sergeant Stitcher was the person who basically informed Martinez that this had become an internal CIA investigation and that type of thing.
Which is just the whole mythology around the CIA is that, you know, they don't operate domestically.
Right. Of course. Of course they don't. Well, and that's where, I mean, I talked about Tom O'Neill's book, Chaos, with Whitney a little while ago, and he talks about CIA operations in the U.S. We know MKUltra occurred in the U.S., so that's just basically a myth that they didn't operate here, or that they haven't.
I mean, yeah.
If you want to play a clip for a minute, I can find the page and I can send you a screenshot.
And while you're pulling that up, it's like another example as well is the CIA still surveilling American citizens because they left the country, despite the fact they would go back. I mean, this was something that famously happened with Malcolm X, where he was saying how while he was in Egypt, he recognized people from New York, and there was actually an assassination attempt made against him in a hotel in Cairo by the CIA. And there's a memo from, I think it was from, why am I blanking on his name? Richard Helms saying that, you know, he's hesitant to surveil American citizens, but he'll move to, you know, quote unquote, neutralize Malcolm X. So that was just a quick little tangent there.
Oh no, that's great. I found the right page. It's page 67 of the first PDF of the Finder's Vault documents. And it's a big enough paragraph that the entire page won't fit on my screen. I'm taking a couple screenshots, but if I can send you that.
Oh, for sure. And I'm just going to play this real quick. I can't right off top of my head recall who dropped this in the chat. I think it was Judy Meyer. I think that's who it was. But this is just something that showed up on RT this morning. But in terms of like narrative seeding, if there's former White House doctors saying that Biden's going to be removed, we are almost at the point to where like we could get potentially 10 years of President Camilleri.
Oh, that's likely, I think.
Vaccine and vaccinated Americans are being told to mask up yet again. There's one group that Joe Biden seems to be giving a pass to.
Reports say many illegal immigrants who have tested positive for the virus are being released into areas where they can interact with the public.
No one told the police department that these people were here. And no one told us that
he's lying.
These people were possibly ill.
So the police in La Jolla, Texas had no idea.
They say they only found out when a customer at a burger restaurant next door
Goddamn
flagged down a
Whataburger.
patrolling officer and told him a family inside was sneezing, coughing, and unmasked. Police say the family members told them Customs and Border Protection processed them a few days.
It's echoing from somewhere. I think it's your mic.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't really know how to fix that other than to move my mic. So I'll do that.
Earlier, and that they had tested positive for COVID. The county judge here says, I call on federal immigration officials to stop releasing infected migrants into our community.
And it's not just La Jolla. Other border towns are said to be suffering the same fate. You think this is newsworthy? You think it's a horrific story during the resurgence of the pandemic? Of course it is. But except for Fox, you aren't going to see this reported on any network.
You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations. The question is whether or not we should be in a position where you are. Why can't the experts say we know that this virus is in fact
Are there people in the Democratic Party who want to fight the president?
Are there people in the Republican Party who think we're sucking the blood out of kids?
Just 3 recent examples of a fading President Biden presented by Bret Baier on Fox News. And listen to the response from Fox's Brit Hume.
Media didn't make a big deal out of them, but made you scratch your head.
Well, that second one you showed there, Brett, was pretty dramatic, and the man obviously had lost his train of thought and couldn't.
Wait, hold up, real quick, because I don't watch a lot of RT. Is RT a Fox React channel now?
I think it's a mix.
Okay, I'm just curious. I'm not judging. I'm just
But we got that archive link to the PDF.
Okay, I want to play the I didn't know that this part was up front there. I just want to hear the doctor bit talking about Joey B.
Stammered around for a little while. These are signs of senility, which is a common thing in elderly people, and Biden, like me, is certainly elderly. But I think it's becoming increasingly obvious that this is the case.
Although the rest of the media won't dare touch this issue, it didn't stop. Former White House doctor for both Obama and Trump, Ronnie Jackson, now a Texas congressman, it didn't stop him from making this prediction also on Fox News.
Where are the people in our academic medicine that were out there calling for President Trump to have a cognitive test? Where are these people? There's something seriously going on with this man right now, and I think that he's either gonna resign. They're gonna convince him to resign from office at some point in the near future for medical issues, or they're gonna have to use the 25th Amendment to get rid of this man right now. There's some serious.
Okay, well, I mean, it's not like we haven't all been wondering when they're gonna pull the plug on Joey B, but I didn't know we had a former Congress critter or a current Congress critter that was a doctor. I'm gonna get this up in a new tab on both of these images, and then we'll be able to pull that up. Did I do this right? Wow, that's huge. Why are you doing that?
If you click the link, then you can just scroll real fast to 67 and you'll be able to just scroll on the whole document, but the screenshots will do too.
Okay. Yeah, no, we'll do that because all right. I'm not the tech guy.
Yeah.
Let's see. We'll go. You're the first one, I believe. And this, who wrote the summary? Do we know?
I believe that it's an MPD officer whose name is redacted, Sergeant Blank.
Okay.
And it seems to me, I could be wrong, but from reading it, it looks like that paragraph was written by somebody else. I don't think that the whole report was written by the same person. I could be wrong, but it's difficult to tell when everything's redacted.
So the writers believe that the Finders organization is and has been utilized by the CIA as a disinformation service, spreading non-essential, non-critical information to various organizations throughout the U.S. and overseas. Is that because Isabel had the passports with stamps to North Korea and Russia and what was it, North Vietnam?
Yes. And that distinction is important because it was during the 50s through the 70s. So it was actively during the Cold War, Vietnam War. It's mind-boggling. I mean, even now you can't get into North Korea. So it's, obviously state-sponsored travel. They do try to present her as a stenographer for the CIA, not like a special agent, who's going around, Mark Wahlberg or anything. But basically, that doesn't really line up with the fact that she's going to North Korea. Now, the other question is, and this doesn't really relate to the screenshot, but basically, was she the only Finders member given these passports? And it's kind of unclear. I would suspect that potentially she wasn't, but because that's the only reason I can see that they would admit that she worked for them, if they were trying to say, oh, it was just her and she was just a stenographer, so it's cool.
Yeah, no, but why would they? I mean, I don't know. I guess if it's 1987 or even 1993, if you're just trying to pass this person off as a stenographer, that's almost believable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, almost.
I mean, I was a kid in 1987, so I really don't know, like, how tenacious the media was, what the media climate. I know that right after Iran Contra, at least in terms of like the next several scandals that rolled out, it seems like the media was a little bit more emboldened. I don't know. I mean, because, okay, so Iran Contra 85, 86. This is 87. The savings and loan thing was about to happen. The WedTech with the Attorney General was about to happen. There, like, so many other things were coming out, and we were only a couple years away from Gary Webb and from finding out just a ridiculous amount about the CIA's involvement in drug trafficking. With drug trafficking, there's almost always human trafficking.
Right. And also we had the parallel scandals going on with the Franklin scandal as well. And one of the things I reported on was the fact that, and again, this doesn't, I have not found evidence to substantiate this, but that Senator John DeCamp of Nebraska, former state senator who's now passed away, stated that he had heard, that he knew that the Franklin scandal was tied directly to the Finders. He also said that he had been contacted by people from within the CIA who were concerned about what had happened, and that they had said that yes, this was happening, yes, and yes, that they were doing some sort of indoctrination experiments, i.e., relating it to MK Ultra with the Finders specifically. So that was what John DeCamp said. Now, whether that's true or not, we don't know. But that's another person relating these scandals together.
And if we take that statement logically to its conclusion, that means that there are like MK Ultra kids running around right now, right, as fully grown adults,
right? Well, especially given the fact that this wasn't prosecuted, was hushed up, most likely continued, maybe under a slightly different guise,
It's just kind of wild to think about, and I'm not sure I want to do that anymore. That's hectic. But I mean, it also the idea that they shut down MK Ultra or shut down even something like Phoenix, it is laughable at best, especially as the ability to understand the effects and how you can psychologically program somebody, and the technology to be able to do that, and the need for more and more control as more and more information becomes available.
Right.
I don't know. And it wasn't until the church committee until anybody even found out about MK Ultra.
Right.
Thanks. Oh.
And they try to distance themselves by saying that, oh, it was a failed experiment. It never worked. How silly of us. Cold War hysteria. Look, the CIA is real funny, and that's done now. What a waste of money. But one of the things that other reporters, researchers have found is that there are documents that kind of refute that narrative and show that the MK Ultra experiments were actually very successful. And that in light of that, it's unlikely that they really would have stopped. They may have called it something different, maybe a different program now, but that it's likely that it probably continued.
I mean, with how like deathly efficient propaganda mechanisms in this day and age are, like, I have no doubt that some iteration of MK Ultra continued, even if it was maybe to like a lesser degree, or if they only zoned in on one aspect of the experiment and then honed that to the point where, you know, we are today, where large masses of people are, you know, brainwashed in a sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at it, for sure. Like, let's say the LSD didn't work so well or something like that, and they just focus on sensory deprivation or inducing trauma via violence or something like that. I mean, there's infinite number of ways they could have gone with it, and we won't know. So.
I almost think the desensitization that people are exposed to from basically birth now through media and entertainment, it has gone a long way towards creating a kind of detachment that most people walk around with, especially when, you know, you talk to them about something like this, or you talk to them about something like oh, I don't know what Operation Warp Speed really was, or who was in charge of it, or who Peter Thiel is, and like where all of his fucking, you know, tentacles go. Like there's a yeah, I guess disassociation or detachment that takes place, and people are like, no, just show me the person in the spandex with the cardboard needle. I'm okay with that. I am.
Yeah.
That's more my speed.
Yeah.
Somebody dropped this in the Union of the Unwanted Telegram this morning, and it's like 5 minutes, but you can get the gist of it pretty quick, and I'll play a couple of minutes of it, and then we can close out. But this is our good buddy and Freedom of the Press Foundation board member John Cusack in a series called Utopia that I guess came out on Amazon Prime. I didn't see it, but it was released just last year.
Wow.
Disrespected science. God. How did you put in that vaccine? And when this vaccine fails, I'll be the scapegoat.
He created a flu that sparked the demand for a vaccine that doesn't work. After everyone in the country is vaccinated.
And the world?
He'll have murdered millions.
Nope, you don't have it.
We need to go now before that vaccine ships and more people die.
Give a percentage of the population a fatal illness, and you make sure it's genetic. See, that was the exciting part. You pass it down. So if you have children before you die, Becky, do you have children? How much evil do you have to do good? People are driven by the need to know what happens next. Do you want to know what happens next? Your father created a world-changing, not world-ending, a world-changing, world-improving omnivirus. And we have taken that virus and embedded it in the vaccine that turns flu. I know.
So, real quick, because he goes into this and he talks about why, and they arrive on overpopulation. That's where they land on for the reason why he did this. I mean, like, anybody else just slightly weirded out by that minute and 20 seconds?
Oh, I'm a little speechless. That's insane.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I
mean, what can you say after that? I can't. Yeah. I don't know. Bit on the nose, John.
Right. And just for the record, before we start to close out and everything, fuck John Cusack. And I don't know if I've said that before or enough. But wow, what a shitbird.
Yep, I'm proudly blocked by him since at least 2018, probably earlier. So I'm just like, whatever, you know. But
I mean, just wow. Anyway, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for hanging out with us and for all the work that you do. And please tell everyone where they can find you, how they can support your work, and what if you have anything coming out soon, please pitch it.
sure. You can find me on Twitter at Elizabeth, Leavos. You can find my work on Consortium News and Mint Press News, and you can also find me on a tiny little page on Facebook as well. But, you know, none of us use Facebook anymore. So I also co-host CN Live, and we are doing semi-regular webcasts right now, so you can look us up on YouTube as well. And that's it. I do have more articles on the Finders coming out. I'm not quite done with the series yet. The next one I'm going to be doing will just look at in more detail the allegations of child abuse and the way that those were dismissed in what looks like a very corrupt way. So that's what's coming.
You gonna throw this together for a book?
I might try. Yeah, maybe potentially. You guys will know about it if that happens.
Groovy. Right on. Well, thank you so much. I love catching up with you. I enjoy these conversations. We should, I think there were a couple of super rays that came in. If this will load up. Nautilus and Bubblegum Douche, thank you very much. Aram says, excellent discussion. It's a real problem that with every fiber in their being, people refuse to acclimate themselves to any reality that comes with any burden of responsibility to act. Implicit financial and social incentives exist for people to accept and even internalize establishment framings and narratives. The ripple effect is that some people tend to knee-jerk defend or defer to state authority. Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic comment. Glory Jones, what do you got?
Nothing that I can think of coming soon. Okay, well, actually, sorta, kinda. LAPD released, well, not just released, but it just went public. LAPD's report on their response to the Echo Park encampment raid. So I'm gonna be grudgingly reading through that and probably responding to it. And yeah, if you just want to be on the lookout for more fascistic country on display from LAPD, on especially on how they target journalists and how they frame people trying to hold them accountable. Yeah. So be on the lookout for that.
Sounds
Cool,
great.
cool. We'll be back. Well, I'll be back at 3 p.m. on the West Coast, 6 p.m. on the East Coast. And I don't know if it's a full panel on Union of the Unwanted tomorrow, but I'll let you know. Hopefully we'll be back on YouTube. We'll do a test at some point this week. Thursday, noon on the East Coast, 9 a.m. here on the West Coast. Wow, it's gonna be fucking cool. Corey Morningstar and Vanessa Beeley will be with us, and I would imagine that I'm not going to say much at all. So that'll be fun for everybody. And then I think
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Okay. Would like to thank everybody for listening to us on Aftermath.fm and iHeartRadio. We will see you next week, and much love to everybody out there in the radio land. August 20th and 21st, Denver, Colorado. Denver Action to Free Assange has a couple events coming up. I'll be speaking at them. Comrade Misty Winston will be there. John 5 from the Flowbots, couple other folk, Charlie Robinson, Macroaggressions. We're gonna get down. We're gonna do an Anything to Say event where the moving art piece throughout Europe with the 3 statues of Assange, Manning, and Snowden with a 4th empty chair for anyone who has something to say. We're gonna recreate that. Can't make statues. Well, I can't. I mean, I'm sure it could be done, but then we'd be totally ripping off this person. So 2-dimensional art, but art nonetheless. And I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be in Greek Park in Denver, which is lovely. And if you're anywhere near Colorado, come out and see us. We would love to hang out with you. And I think that's going to do it. Huge thanks one more time to Elizabeth Voss, Sleepy Josh on the 1s and 2s, Glory Jones, my better than your co-host. And we'll see you soon. Good luck to us all.
Love ya.
Thank you.